Okay, we're ready to begin today's webinar, and with that said, I'm going to turn it over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Linda. Hi, I am Steve Lytle, Seed Advisor here at Unity Seeds, and I'm also a Certified Crop Advisor. I wanted to thank you for attending our webinar today. Unity Seeds and our professional seed advisors work hard every day to provide top genetics and very specific recommendations for each American family farm. I am confident you will find real value in the information our guest speaker will share with us today. We'll be hearing from Dr. Howard Brown, who has served as an adjunct assistant professor at the University of Illinois for the past 15 years. He is a past chair of the International Certified Crop Advisor Board, and he serves on many other advisory groups and committees involved in agriculture production and nutrient stewardship. Dr. Brown, I'll turn the program over to you at this time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that introduction. As I mentioned earlier, it kind of scares me to know that I'm that old, that all that stuff starts to accumulate over time. I want to thank for having the opportunity to visit with you today, and I think it's imperative because I think it shows that we all have to continue learning, and that's a lifetime process. And I think it was best said by a fella quite a while back, but his name was Alan Toffler, and his quote that I remember is he made the statement, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And I think those of you out there that have a few years behind you, whether it be in business or in farming, you can relate to that because we're constantly challenged to put aside what we believe and listen and try to understand some of the new concepts before we pass judgment. So today is going to be no different. I'm going to throw a few new things out there, maybe just review, and if nothing else, hopefully a little entertainment as we go forward. Now we're going to talk about nutrient movement, and hopefully you can see my slide change. Linda, if you're on, did I change to mass flow on your end?
Yes, you are. I'm right with you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I have to have that checked. I have been known historically to get wound up pretty tight and go into about 3 to 4 minutes and 5 slides to realize that I'm either on mute or my slides aren't moving. So I really appreciate the support. But we're talking today about placement of nutrients. And I think it's important just to go back with a little review of why placement is important. And really it's nutrient dependent. I'm going to describe 3 ways we know nutrients move in the soil. Now, there's probably other ways, but these are the primary ways that we've found and investigated and vetted through research. First one is mass flow. Now, mass flow is when the nutrient in the soil actually moves fluidly with water. And so wherever water goes, the nutrients go. That's why it's called mass, everything together, flow. The next one would be diffusion. Now, diffusion's a little different. If you're in a room with no windows, no doors, well, you have to have a window or door, right? With one door, no windows, and somebody at the end of the room lights up a nice big cigar, do you smell the smoke right away? No. Why? Because the smoke is concentrated at the other end of the room. However, if you shut the door and there's no air movement, within a period of time there will not be a place in that room that won't smell like smoke. Why? Because the smoke goes from a high concentration to a low concentration until it's all the same. We call that equilibrium. And that's called diffusion, movement down a gradient from high to low concentration. I just described how smoke moves in the air. Same thing when we talk about the soil and water. If you have a high concentration in one area and a low concentration in the other, the nutrients will move from high to low concentration. And then when we look at this diffusion, this is kind of just a diagram or some way to represent this. The brown is the soil, of course, and you also see the water in the blue. And it shows that the nutrients can actually diffuse off of the soil to the root. Now, why? Because the root creates a low concentration, because nutrients go in right around the root. Low concentration has been created, higher concentration away, movement down a gradient called diffusion. Now, in doing this, the distance the nutrients move is different depending on the nutrient. For example, phosphorus is the most immobile nutrient that we think of from a standpoint of our primary nutrients or even secondary in the soil. So being immobile, it moves relatively little. In fact, during a growing season, it'll move about 0.2 of a millimeter. Now, what is that? Well, you know what an inch is, and there's 2.54 centimeters in an inch, and 1 millimeter is 1/10 of a centimeter. So we're talking not very far. So phosphorus doesn't move. Now, potassium doesn't move very far either, but it's 10 times more than phosphorus. So in theory, if you're short phosphorus and potassium, the first one that's going to show up short is going to be phosphorus because it moves less. The second one's going to be potassium. Now, the last way roots move in the soil is by root interception. The roots actually bump into it. And a lot of people think, wow, you know, that root mass is big. It's going to take up nutrients by bumping into it. Well, in reality, the roots occupy less than 1 to 3% of the soil volume of the topsoil. Therefore, although there's a lot of roots, it appears that way, it's not a significant way the nutrients are taken up by the plant. So really it's the first two. It's mass flow or diffusion are the main ways the nutrients move. Now let's break up the nutrients that we really think about, where we spend most of the time and investment with our crop. Nitrogen. Number one, second greatest expense to corn production, only to seed. And when we talk about nitrogen, nitrogen moves in the soil primarily by mass flow. We won't get into the reason why nitrogen moves that way other than the fact that when you put on your nitrogen, a lot of you put on anhydrous ammonia, some of you use UAN, some of you may use urea, some may use ammonium sulfate. All those forms have in part or in whole ammonium type nitrogen. Now when you put ammonium on the soil, in the soil let's say, and the soil is warm and moist, it doesn't remain as ammonium for maybe more than 2 weeks at the maximum. It's converted to nitrate. So when you hear people talk about nitrogen in corn and how nitrogen moves by mass flow, moves with water, moves places we don't want it to go, they're talking about the nitrate form because of what I described earlier. And we're not going into detail during this session as to that process and how it's regulated, but it's just assume your nitrogen we're talking about is in the nitrate form. Now some of the other nutrients that move by mass flow, of course, will be sulfur, and the sulfur is taken up by the plant as a sulfate ion. It's an anion, and it's not held by the soil very well, so it moves with water. Another one we don't worry too much about, but for those alfalfa producers we do, is boron. Boron is taken up by the plant as borate, which is a negative charged ion, and it also moves with water because the soil doesn't do a good job of holding on to that. Now the nutrients we think of that move otherwise by diffusion and not primarily by mass flow would be those other two big guns that we have in our NPK arsenal, phosphorus and potassium. Remember, phosphorus moves the least amount. That's why we call it relatively immobile, but it still does diffuse from a high to a low concentration when there's a root around. Potassium, 10 times more movable, but still not very much when we're only talking 2 millimeters during a growing season. So both of those, we pretty much, other than in mass flow, the roots don't have to grow to the nutrient because the nutrient will move to the root with water. However, when we have phosphorus and potassium, we pretty much have to have the nutrient placed close by. Now in this diagram, the red circle indicates the kind of the area by which nutrients can be provided to that root, because water will diffuse, or water will actually move by mass flow. As the water is taken up, it pulls water from other areas into closer to the root. The nutrients can go in by mass flow. Nitrogen as nitrate, sulfate, sulfur, and borate as boron. So those type of nutrients get in with mass flow. Now if you think about it, when do we have a lot of moisture? We have a lot of moisture early. So as long as we got the nutrients on, those type of nutrients on early, usually you won't see a deficiency of nitrogen or of sulfur and of boron if there's adequate amounts in the solution that could get into the plant. Now, when we talk about phosphorus and potassium, however, they move by diffusion. The roots have to grow close to proximity of the nutrient. So if you notice those red lines in that black circle there, the roots, that's probably the access area the root can have of the soil. So I can actually, and I'm sure you can see my little arrow, I can have all the nutrients right down in this area here, but those nutrients will be positionally unavailable to the root system because they're not close by. Now once the root system starts to grow and expand and gets close by, the nutrients go in. but there's a temporary shortage. So when we talk about starter fertilizers and placement, what we're trying to navigate is to put a source of nutrients close by that young root system because it's limited in size, and the roots will find it and they'll take up a more adequate amount of nutrients, giving it more growth and making it look more robust, maybe even being a leaf stage different early on. Now the problem is that starter, that's why we call it starter. It just starts the thing up. Does it equate to higher yield at the end of the season? That's a question that you and your Unity seed dealer or somebody you're working with from the standpoint of fertility need to address those questions. But it sure does make you feel better, especially if you're in reduced tillage situations when the coolness of the soil early on in the growing season even limits the size of the root system more as compared to conventional tillage. So the influence of nutrient uptake then, if nutrients are moving by diffusion, in other words the roots have to be close by, the influence of the weather, of the soil climate, the soil environment is going to influence how the nutrients are taken up and how that will affect plant growth. Now what you're seeing here, just look at the bars, there's 3 years, and the different letters on top of the bars just tells you that they're different. Each bar is different. So in 2007, the rate of application of phosphorus was significant at each time you incrementally increased the rate to corn yield. However, in 2008, the environment was such, probably had a warm, moist early growing season, root systems were robust, we didn't have to worry about the rate of application. We don't see a response. It may have also been an environment where yield was limited by moisture. And then in 2009, again, you see a response. So some years we will and some years we won't see a response, sometimes to placement of nutrients or the concentration of nutrients in the soil environment. Now the other thing we have to keep in mind is proliferation of roots. Now in this example, all I want you to understand is between those red bars is the area by which different fertilizers were placed. Of course, the first one says control. There was no fertilizer applied, so you just see what a normal root system would look like. The second one, phosphorus was concentrated in a band between those two red lines, so you can see the concentration of phosphorus, what it did to that root mass once the roots found a higher concentration of phosphorus. The next one is nitrogen. Now you can see nitrogen is, really people relate nitrogen to yield. Well really nitrogen is related to vegetative growth. You put nitrogen on a tomato plant in your garden, you will be the talk of the town as being the best gardener as long as they don't come back and look for fruit. Because if you put nitrogen on a tomato, you eventually, or at certain concentrations, you'll actually suppress blooms. So you won't have too many tomatoes on the tomato plant, but it'll look really good. So corn's the same way. Whether it be corn vegetative growth or roots, so it'll expand in that area of nitrogen application. Ammonium, even more intensely, but remember ammonium is that form of nitrogen that once it's in a warm moist soil doesn't hang around and it's quickly converted to nitrate over a period of about 2 weeks. And then finally potassium. Potassium, unlike phosphorus, there's still an expansion of that root system in that zone of application, but it's not quite as intense as you see with some of the other nutrients. Now this is key because if you concentrate a nutrient, you're going to have an expanded root system to some degree in that area, which will enhance uptake. And again, placement, if we're talking about a 2x2, a 1x1, a starter application, in that concentration, we should see an expanded root system as a result of the nutrients. They don't grow to the nutrients because they're there, but once they're there, the expansion of that root system in a higher concentration is more intense than it is around where the concentrations are less. So you have more root growth where fertilizer is concentrated. So what happens, let's say we place all of our fertilizer in a band somewhere. So what happens when it dries out? Well, if we think about it, if we always put our fertilizer in a band, don't broadcast, don't do anything, and put it in the same band year after year, we get a nice concentration of nutrients, and we all know that if you concentrate those nutrients in that band, they're going to remain more plant available because the soil can't tie them up. There's a lot of avenues by which the soil can fix nutrients, not lose them, but fix them so the plant can't have them. So if you keep them concentrated, they're more likely to be available. However, if what I've said so far has any value, then if we put all of our nutrients in that band, roots are going to expand, take up those nutrients, but what else do they take up? Well, we have to remember that all nutrients are taken up by the plant in water. So if you concentrate the nutrients in the same area time after time after time, your root mass is going to be very prolific. It's going to take up a lot of nutrients, but it's going to be the first area to dry out. So this is one question. When we talk about placement and we talk about zone placing fertilizers, a longer term effect, or something we all need to think about, is what's going to happen if we continuously go back into that same band, put the nutrients as in relationship to a shortage of water and nutrient uptake. Now, I don't have the answer. I'm sorry if you got on here and you expect me to give you all the answers, but I'm giving you the very important questions that have not yet been addressed. So if you have strip till equipment, if you're strip or deep band placing fertilizer, my first suggestion would be every time it's applied, offset it by 3 inches with your RTK. So if you have guidance systems, offset it so that you have concentrated bands every 3 or 4 inches across your soil profile horizontally, so that you have these hot bands that roots can access, not just one hot band. And then as we go forward, we're going to have more and more research from our land-grant universities that help address this kind of an applied science question, I think, as we move forward. So the key is, where should you place nutrients? Where are the roots? And where is the water? Those are the two big questions we need to think about. Now, when we talk about placement, and I'm specifically focusing in on broadcast versus a deep band placement, no-till versus strip-till kind of thing. So this is work done by Fabian Fernandez. He was at Purdue University, got his PhD there, and he came to Illinois, and now he is at Minnesota and working in water quality. And this is a lot of his research that he performed while he was at the University of Illinois. Now, in this example of Dr. Fernandez's work, you see that he's looking at NTBC, that's no-till broadcast. NTBDP is no-till deep band placement, and STDP is strip-till deep band placement. Now, in this example, somebody say, well, wow, strip-till deep band placement is the way to go, based off of this in corn. Soybeans, it looks like it's a little higher, although in soybeans it is significantly different, although it's not a lot. And whenever I say significant, that means we're pretty sure the difference was caused by the treatments. So in this particular case, strip-till deep band placement looks pretty good for both corn and beans. Now, the other two you can't differentiate because they're pretty much the same. Now, let's just look at, if we did decide to strip till or deep band place, what are some of the benefits? Okay, if we strip till, improve planting conditions, high surface residue in the fields, and I could take a poll, but I'm not going to take the time to do that right now, is how many of you are strip till versus conventional? And I'd say a lot more of you are strip till or no till. So we've got better conditions because we're planting into a microenvironment that we've got conventional tillage, essentially, because we've tilled that microenvironment, but we left the residue on the rest of the soil surface to mitigate or try to minimize soil erosion and possibly improve soil quality or soil health as a result of accumulating a little bit of organic carbon. Now, when we talk about this, also, when we till, we actually dry it out. We've got a lower bulk density because we kind of fluff the soil up, so it dries out a little quicker. And what you see here in the chart is showing you a little less moisture in that area of planting where we've tilled it versus where we have not. And it also, if we have any little crusting or maybe a little surface compaction, the tillage helps us out there too. Now, some drawbacks to strip till. Okay, we have a narrow window, and there are some frustrated individuals right now that didn't get into their window this year for strip till in the fall. Well, and so we have to go to Plan B in those situations where they didn't get their fall anhydrous ammonia on to make their strips in the Midwest. No need for strip till if the spring is warm and dry. So if you want to strip till and you don't put on strips in the fall, or you don't get the opportunity, then that's a manual effort you have to make in the spring to make those strips without very much of a reason other than making those strips. Now, doing it right. there are some situations where we'll go out into a field that's got a little bit of roll, a little bit of topography, and as a result, maybe we go down the slope and we've just created a little bit of what I'd refer to as rill erosion, because the water will follow that path of that slot down the hill and it'll start eroding, and maybe it turns into a little gully and maybe it turns into a bigger gully, depends upon the duration and intensity of rain. And also when we're doing this, wet falls or late harvest, if we get compelled to put those strips in and we kind of push the edge of the envelope, we can end up with more of a problem, because many times, especially with anhydrous ammonia application in the early spring when it's a little wet, we'll go out there in our low areas, the knife will cut a slot rather than till the soil, and it'll create sidewall compaction, and unfortunately that sidewall compaction leaves a little air pocket with ammonia at the bottom. That slot will fill with ammonia, so when we cut off the top to plant the grain, many times there'll be free ammonia seep up and just nip those young roots as they're starting to grow, causing the plant to be shorter. Many times farmers will look in their low areas and they'll blame wet, cold soils. But if they've strip-tilled, putting anhydrous ammonia on in the spring, they should take a closer look at the tips of those roots. They may find they've actually suffered through some ammonia burn, because ammonia is toxic to living tissue. Staying in the row when planting, that's another issue with strip till, is making sure you can stay on the row. If you got a little bit of a weave to the row, or you have a contour you plant around, it's kind of tough. And then finally, matching row with the width of equipment. And the larger operators, with RTK, I think we're resolving that issue, but if you don't have all these technologies, matching a smaller planter or smaller anhydrous ammonia applicator with a larger planter sometimes can be tough. Now, another question that comes up with placement, okay, it's not only what is the ideal way to put up to place fertilizer, but can we reduce the use of fertilizer? If we don't fertilize the soil, we fertilize the plant. And again, Dr. Fernandez's research, this is I think it's a summary of 3 years of work that he had. And of course, this isn't going to give you an example of everything out there. This is just one snapshot in one state in the Midwest, and specifically in Illinois. So it could be different in other areas, but I think not. I think the trend is the same. So if you look at this, it's basically 3 different types of fertilizer application: broadcast no-till, deep band placed no-till, and deep band placed strip till. And when you look at this graphically, the first thing that jumps out is, hey, strip till, deep band placement is the way to go. However, if you look at the rate of application and you look under 0 fertilizer applied, we still have a response in yield to strip band or deep band placement. Well, what this is telling me is the tillage effect, because the other 2 are no-till. So I'm seeing more of a tillage effect than I am a fertilizer placement effect. And when you look at the no-till, deep band versus broadcast, you do see kind of a trend where you have deep band placed, how there's an increase. So to address the question, can you reduce fertilizer use with band placement, deep band placement? And based on this research, it would be very questionable that that would be a good management practice to do, just simply to think you can reduce the amount of fertilizer just by placing it. And if you go back to what I said about phosphorus and potassium, you put less on in a concentrated band, you're amplifying your problem, because there is even less available in that geography, because it is going to not have the roots aren't going to have access, because those both are relatively immobile. And you have an expansive root system that's not going to have an opportunity to get into that band, and what that expansive root system is going to be doing all the time is sucking more nutrients out of your soil and putting nothing back, and we'll be talking about that. Soybeans, we look at soybeans, there's a little bit of a difference there. I think we still see a tillage effect, but the strange thing on soybeans, phosphorus, as you can see in the deep band placement, increased with increasing rate, and for some reason decreased with increasing rate when we look at the potassium. So, but there's different trends that appear. But bottom line, the question, if you have a question, can I reduce the amount of fertilizer to put on by deep band placing? You bet. Is it going to have impact on yield if I do that? Very likely could. You can do anything you want, but as far as looking at the economics and looking at the risk you accept, there's very little, if any, research that would say on a consistent basis deep band placing is going to save you money. Now, it may, You may have already done it. You may want to jump through the phone and say, Howard, I already know this, but I'm just giving you the futuristic view based off of what we currently know. And we need more experimentation in order to understand that. Now, there are some things we do know when we look at what happens to the soil test when we deep band place. Now, here's some examples. And what I'm going to show you is a series of slides, and these slides are going to be based on placement. As you can see here, we place the fertilizer in the row, and we have spacing away from the row. And we're looking at 7.5-inch spacing away. We have 7.5-inch, 15-inch, and 22.5. So we took soil tests in the row and away from the row. And what you're looking at here is 0 to 4-inch level, 4 to 8-inch, 8 to 12, and you've got no-till broadcast, strip-till broadcast, and strip-till deep band placement. And as you look at these, basically what I want you to see is this is IR is in the row, 7.5 inches away from the row, 15 inches away, and 22.5 inches away. So if the fertilizer was placed in the row, you see the different types, and you look across. So what it tells you in the row fertilizer placement, and this is the soil test levels. You remove, if your placement in the row, the crop removes nutrients and you see them decrease. To the left of the line it decreases, to the right it increases. And this is no nutrients applied. So regardless whether it's in the row, 7.5, 15, or 22.5, all the soil tests look pretty much the same. Now we put on 115 pounds of P2O5 in the row. Now the crop grows. What does the soil test do? Well, as you can see, the fertilizer's in the row, so we actually still increase the soil test level in no-till in the surface, and 7.5, 15, 22, because we broadcast, no-till broadcast, so the soil tests are pretty much uniform across. And as you can see, as you go down, you reduce the nutrients because all the phosphorus is on the surface, so as the roots take nutrients out of the lower profile, they're not put back. They're put back on the top. So actually that helps increase the surface P-test level, but it decreases below that. Now if you look at the strip-till broadcast, that means strip-till, you see pretty much the same as you do with no-till. However, less nutrients. And then finally the strip-till deep band place. Now you see that you've placed those nutrients in the band, so you've got some really high soil test deeper into the profile. However, look what's happening 7.5, 15, and 22 inches away. We're actually decreasing the soil test level, although we're expanding the soil test level in the row, we're decreasing. Now, if you think of these nutrients being drawn in by the plant, let's say these roots go out and they cover 30 inches. Let's just say they do. They don't, but let's say they go 15 inches on either side of the row. They're sucking in all these nutrients, and they go into the plant. What is taken off in the grain is gone, but what's left in the stover falls back down to the surface. Now, at the same time, those roots also die, so they have nutrients. So we could be concentrating nutrients within a vicinity of that row, which also amplifies the idea that we're concentrating nutrients rather than having them spread out. So with this in mind, it's just suggesting the fact that if we continuously put nutrients in the same location over time, those that are less mobile in the soil, phosphorus and potassium, we could be depleting the soil test levels of all the other areas of the soil, and therefore when those roots explore those areas, they have a harder time finding the nutrients when we're putting them all in a band. And that's when we go back to how we place this, it may be something, if we have that kind of equipment for deep band placement or we promote that, spread it out every 3 inches until we come up with some better ideas. And then here's the same thing when we're looking at we're looking at a high rate of phosphorus, and you can see we're increasing the deep band place and the strip till, yet we're decreasing. And the other ones we're still doing fairly well with the soil test unless it's in the strip till deep band placement. Same thing, and I'm going to scan through potassium. Potassium is a little different though. When you look, this is 0, so they all pretty much look the same. But again, with potassium, strip till deep band placement, we have high, and then we decrease significantly. And then you also do the same thing when we look at the highest rate. The last thing I wanted to mention is nitrogen. Nitrogen is very important. Placement, I think, is key. And we all have to keep in mind when we think about nitrogen is nutrient uptake over time. And here's a graphic showing you the nutrient uptake. And these little humps relate to when the nutrient is most taken in by the plant. First, the green is when it's the leaves, and you'll see it peaks right around tassel time, then the stalks and tassel, then the cobs, husks, and shank. Now, if you'll notice, all of these start to decrease soon after pollination or flowering, and they go down, but the one that goes up is the grain. And the purpose there is the nitrogen that's in the plant at that time gets remobilized into the grain. Now, there may still be some nitrogen getting to the plants beyond the tassel time, but we're starting to believe, based off of what we're doing with our in-wash testing, that a lot of the nitrogen gets accumulated into that plant up to pollination, and then from that point forward, it gets relocated. So toward the end of the season, what happens to the plant? We see it starting to fire because the plant is cannibalizing all the nitrogen and actually killing the lower stalk tissue. Now, if that happens sooner than later, unfortunately, then that's what we have as a recipe for stalk rots. When does that happen? Is when we have ideal yielding conditions and all of a sudden it stays cloudy for a long time, or it gets cold, or unfortunately we have gray leaf spot taking out the leaf area, not producing sugars, and all of that happens, and then the nitrogen in the stalk is utilized much more readily, and it's used up before the end of the season. The stalks die, the microbes eat the dead tissue, and we have stalk rot. So the key for this on nitrogen, and it's not only with placement, but it's also going to be timing. So if you could tell me when it's going to rain, I will tell you when to put all the nitrogen on. But if you can't, the way we tell the farmer is to hedge his environmental risk and put it on over time. Early, pre-plant, and post are 3. Maybe they don't do 3. Maybe they do 2. But any way they do it, as long as they spread out their risk, and they minimize their environmental risk as far as nitrogen loss. Spreading it out using a systems approach, here's just showing what farmers have done. This is 2011, 2012. We've been doing this for 15 years. It is between 13 and 17 bushel average per year advantage to using a system approach to nitrogen management rather than an application. Now, as far as with nitrogen, it's not only placement but timing. Here's an example of a fall N-rate study looking at optimum nitrogen versus a spring N-rate study. I combined these so they're in one trial, and as you can see, based off the blue bars, it took about 50 pounds of nitrogen to optimize yield applied in the spring of 2010. However, in a fall applied, it took 150 pounds of nitrogen to get 200 bushel corn. So what did that tell the farmers? Well, we had a very wet year, I think it was 2009, 2010, and as a result of all of that water, we had significant nitrogen loss from fall application. That doesn't mean we can raise corn on 50 pounds of nitrogen every year. It's the dynamics in nitrogen that makes it a mystery. So, but what it does say, in that year, we probably had significant loss compared to applying the nitrogen in the spring of the year. Doesn't happen every year, but it's something we need to be aware of. So when we look at this, there's one other tool I just thought I'd mention. When we look at placement of nitrogen and look at a systems approach, we're using a tool called N-Watch. This is a management tool that a farmer can use to simply inventory what residual nitrogen he has after harvest, track what happens to that over time, even after the ground thaws in the spring, verify if there's something there, and if he wants to make a management decision on supplemental nitrogen or maybe cutting back on supplemental nitrogen, this tool will help. And basically, I'm just showing you an example of, we put a template out there. Here's an idea or an example of several testing dates, and the farmer was tracking his nitrogen. And all I want to show here is when you look at the very first testing date, that's showing you that it was fall applied, by the way. There's not much left from that fall application, so that was a red light. And then when he put nitrogen on, the test showed that it responded. And he tries to get up here at this red line, this dashed red line, when the corn's 6 inches tall. That's what we think a corn plant needs at that point in time, and that gives him some assurance that his nitrogen management system accomplished what he was looking for. So again, when we look at what we've talked about today, it's managing nutrients, not necessarily just as an application. Throw them out there and let them go and move on to the next step. It's managing them probably more as a system. Think about how you've placed them, think about the aspects of root growth, and think about long-term how that's going to affect nutrient uptake. It's about using less and utilizing more. So if we need better utilization, it's not about putting more on, it's about doing a better job of utilizing what we've got. It's about accountability and profitability, because when we look to the future, it's not just about producing more bushels per acre. We have to have the stewardship part of the equation as we move forward, because what we're doing has to be sustainable over time. And to be sustainable, we have to have some regard to the environment, which I know most of you online do. And then finally, I talk about it's about minimizing environmental impact by optimizing yield and maximizing input utilization. You'll hear me talk, it's all about mom. And when I think of mom, I think of loving, selfless, caring, nurturing, all the good things, and that is what I want people to think about when they think about agriculture. Okay, well, that's all I have. I've taken a few more minutes than I thought I would, but I'd be glad to address any questions that I may have stirred up during the presentation.
Okay, with that said, Steve, we're going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Linda. I want to thank you very much, Dr. Brown. You've given us a wealth of information to discuss with your Unity Seeds Seed Advisor. Also, Linda, we'll be going back to you and Dr. Brown in a moment for Q&A. And I encourage everyone to enter their questions into the question box. I'd like to let everyone know that we're extremely excited about the performance of our hybrids again this year. Just for example, our 5514 Smart Stack with the refuge in the bag averaged advantage over 4 competitive Pioneer hybrids of 16.41 bushel per acre in 18 replicated locations in 2014. Another one we had was a 4814 VT Double Pro refuge in the bag, average advantage over 4 other competitive Pioneer hybrids of 11.35 bushel per acre in 18 replicated locations this year. And the last one I'd like to mention is the 7914 3000 GT, delivering a 12.8 bushel advantage over AgriGold 6533 VT3 Pro Rib in 18 replicated locations in 2014. It was actually second place in outright yield this year in the Audubon, Indiana first trial. Let us keep in mind that Unity Beans had a remarkable season in first trials in 2014. A couple highlights would include winning outright in Howe, Indiana by yielding in excess of 90 bushel per acre with our 3031 Roundup Ready 2 variety, and 82 bushel per acre in Wolcott, Indiana with our 3303 Roundup Ready 2s. Linda, do we have any questions out there at this time?
Okay, yes. I do have a question. Do some hybrids respond differently to nutrient placement, such as hybrids with better better root ratings? I'm sorry. So hybrids with better root ratings.
Okay, that's a question for me, Linda?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to give you the straight shot, okay? And it just may be that I'm not in the know here, okay? Yes, they do, but frankly, we don't know which ones do and which ones don't in a very good way. Now, the reason I say that, that'll probably contradict some of the things you may have heard, but if we could grow our plants in a laboratory on the bench in a controlled environment, then we can actually determine which ones do things differently and whether there's any significance to that. Since we cannot do that, when you're throwing these seeds out into a different environment, as you all know, you take 2 steps one direction, you're in a whole different environment. So to say these hybrids are taking things up differently, it's very difficult to do. Now, we do know root growth, for example. You know which ones may grow roots more expansively. You know which ones may grow roots further beyond the time of pollination. And the best, I would say, is to visit with your Unity seed dealers and ask them, because they're the ones that know the hybrids better than anybody else. But to say that you're going to find across hybrids and varieties asking me to say which ones do this, and frankly, racehorse, workhorse, a lot of this terminology, I really struggle with being able to help anybody understand that. So maybe I'm just too simplistic of a thinker, but I really am not going to be a good source to help you there.
Okay, with that said, that looks like all the questions that we have here today. And so, Steve, I'll go ahead and turn that back over to you.
Okay, thank you, Linda. In closing there, I want to thank you again, Dr. Brown, for sharing your knowledge and research. I know all the attendees heard you loud and clear when you said manage nutrients as a system rather than just an application. Here at Unity Seed, we believe nutrient stewardship is also very important to consider as we and our valued customers start the process of planning for the 2015 planting season. Please remember to join us December 2nd for our EPA compliance webinar entitled Are You Refuge Legal? Featuring Dr. David Powell. Thank you again for sharing some of your time with us today. I hope the information was timely for all of you. Please remember to call one of our seed advisors at 800-338-4558 and plant Unity Seeds for the top value in your 2015 seed investment. Thank you all for attending.